Well, hello, everybody. My name's Colin Dutcheshen. You may know me. I'm the president and owner of Heads Up Plant Protectants. Just as we're wrapping up 2025, wanted to just quickly have a recap on our product, Heads Up, as we think about going into 2026 and how to help those growers with seedling diseases, white mold, or SDS. So again, Heads Up, it's a great first step, a starting point to manage white mold. Everybody knows that, that key thing is picking the right variety that has the most tolerance. You can try cultural practices for your growers that struggle with white mold to do wider rows or reducing plant populations. And then the next thing, of course, besides fertility, is look for a great start with Heads Up seed treatment. Our product has been around for 30 years. It works through a mode of action called systemic acquired resistance, helping the plant to acquire a higher level of resistance to fight off disease throughout the growing season, and it's systemic and season long. What I like about the product and a lot of growers appreciate is it's an added step of insurance, and that when it comes to relying on a foliar fungicide alone, it's often hard to hit the right window when that soybean plant is flowering. If the weather isn't conducive for spraying at the right moment, oftentimes a foliar application could be for naught. So growers like to have the extra insurance. For a few dollars an acre more, you can put Heads Up in, and it just builds a better IPM plan for your growers. So what I wanted to go over with the group on a technical level is a good question that we get often. How can Heads Up help? When we think of seed treatments, we think of only protecting for the first 14 to 21 days if they're fungicides. How can Heads Up help as a full season systemic product? And the answer is we are not fungicidal. Heads Up doesn't work to kill or stop or inhibit the growth of a fungus. It doesn't do anything in the root zone where those fungal diseases attacking the plant. But we're a biological working through a mode of action called systemic acquired resistance. Now, how does systemic acquired resistance work? Obviously, the name is helping to acquire a higher level of resistance. But what we've learned with our company, working in part with our molecular biologist on staff, is that Heads Up expresses a particular defensive gene within the soybean plant. I'm going to do a little illustration here. So what we look for as a company to know Heads Up is working, something called gene expression. And here's how gene expression works and how we monitor it with our product. So if we had a y-axis and an x-axis, we are looking at a particular gene that's related to pathogen-related protein development. We're going to call these PR genes. And the expression of these genes is going to be illustrated on the y-axis with this being, let's say, arbitrarily 1, this being 1.5, this being 2, etc. On the x-axis, we're looking at growth stage of the plant. So we're going to call this time 0, which is basically germination. And then we can call this, your vegetative stages here and your reproductive stages here. So now typically white mold, it infects the plant around flowering when the flowers are falling off the plant and there's an open wound for those spores to attack the plant. That's often 60 days plus after planting. So what we're looking at here is probably somewhere, in the early reproductive stages that we have to be concerned about spraying a fungicide. Now, with every soybean variety, there is an innate level of soybean genetic defense. Some varieties are better at defending themselves against disease, and some are not as great. Just for this exercise, we're just going to assume an average score against a disease like white mold, and that genetic package might be just for a baseline. When we look at gene expression of these defensive genes, let's call that a 1. With heads up, what we've noticed is that right from germination, we see a spike in these defensive genes. And this might be, 100% increase in gene expression. So that'll take it up to being a 2. This is considered the prime state that heads up puts the plant in. Now, what's really interesting is when infection sets in, innately, the plant is going to do everything in its power to shift its resources to fight off that infection. And when that happens, we see these defensive genes starting to scale and build up within the plant. With heads up, since we started in a prime state, we have a higher level defense right from the beginning of the year. But what we've been able to detect in our laboratory doing tissue samples is that this gene expression just really escalates and ramps up about 50 times quicker than it would naturally. And it's an exponential growth that we see in the level of genes expressed. So again, with heads up versus stock or standard genetic ability of the plant, we see that gene expression without heads up, it has a baseline and the plant tries to react when infection sets in. With heads up, we see an increase in that gene expression right from early on in the season. And then we see this exponential shift and the plant being able to better ramp up its defenses and fight that disease off post-infection. We went over the gene expression experiment and how we look at how heads up is working. Basically, heads up is called heads up because we put the plant in a primed or enhanced state to fight off disease. And those genes really exponentially take off once the infection sets in. And keep in mind, this is not a silver bullet, but part of a well-rounded disease management plan. In the example I talked about white mold, we see the same effect with sudden death syndrome. Again, the most important thing is to find a racehorse variety with good genetics, and heads up will help bring that genetic package forward. With that, I appreciate everyone's time and attention and wish you all a wonderful selling season and a strong start to 2026.